Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SPReacts where today we have ourselves the entirety of an album from an act named The Muggles, titled Raided Arrgh. And if we switch over to here, you can probably tell by the Arrgh that this is pirate themed, as I understand it. This is like pirate metal or something along those lines. I could be wrong, but we're going to listen through each of the tracks within this album from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Starting with the Brethren of the Coast, let's go. I do appreciate the tone of the hurdy-gurdy.
Men are the rules, yet we follow the code. Live by the sea, filled with greed. Blood powder veins, turn to bloodshade, laid out in chains. Against our foes, we play the game. Life, through fingers, flints like wine. Drink up, ye filthy swine. The ocean calls for bones. Thicker than steel, grip up our God, boot of our heel. We were called from the sea, summoned to meet with thee. Blood drips from our steel. From the ends of the earth, we gather to drink the mead. A life where we're free. We can end on the
Interesting syncopation on that last part of each half.
the sad walk in the field. So stand in a pie, for I propose a toast to the runner of the ghost. Gathered around, 3 sheets to the wind. Fired my gun, 10 lights on me. The royal crown put a bounty on all of our heads. What say thee? I say to the gun. Those bastards think our time has reached me. You know the line. They forget that we're men. We'll walk our planks, scorpions eat dogs, killers we drink. We were called from the sea, summoned to meet with thee. Blood drips from our steel. From the end
Great vocal fry and call and response there.
to drink our mead. A life where we're free. We can end on the tide, anchored and in the post. The dead walk in the field. So stand in a pie, for I propose a toast to the brother of the voice. The mainsails set course by the wind.
Interesting triplet feel here.
And ready the cannons. Kill all the men and clean all the women. Men of the dead, back in the sea. We were called from the sea, summoned to meet with thee.
And a return to the hope.
From the ends of the earth, we gathered to drink our mead. A life where we're free. We can end on the tide, anchored and mend the post. The dead walk in the field. So stand in a pie, for I propose a toast to the brother of the ghost.
And back to that main hurdy-gurdy melody there. I enjoy the harmonies throughout that. This will be an interesting track to talk about, and it's sounding like it'll be an interesting album to listen through. So Brethren of the Coast kind of sounds like a track where we are discussing both a love and appreciation for our pirate comrades, as well as I gather, maybe getting ready for a voyage or something like that. I think it's celebrating our existence, our code, who we are, and sort of like letting people know not to sort of screw with us and standing together. And it's a nice sense of kinsmanship, and it sort of sets the scene in a way that's very authentic for, I think, the story and the style. I feel like the vocals here were handled really well. There was a nice vocal fry which had an edge to it, which I think is appropriate for the subject matter, while sounding very piratey, without being too much, you know. There was a kind of a cutthroat tone to it that had an edge that meshed well with a lot of the distorted guitar elements and a lot of the potentially spicier stuff, but it also had a melody to it, a sense of melody to it that I think aligned well with some of the more complex harmonic stuff that was going on throughout this piece. There was a nice sense of catchiness with the way that we applied ourselves to the rhythm of some of the drum parts and how things unified at the end of each first half of the chorus take. We're very attentive with the storytelling, was trying to balance that with something catchy despite, again, being metal and trying to sort of make it heavy. And ultimately, I just feel like the call and responses were strong, and the kind of the chants and the backing vocals on the sides and certain parts there during the triplet time component was great. And it seemed like vocal technique that we could maintain, as in they were doing that fry properly. They were carefully choosing notes that mattered in these sequences, but they were also taking care of their vocal cords, which is great. The track itself at 3 minutes 25 is really well fleshed out. There's a lot to appreciate within it. Again, a mixture of the guitars, bass, drums, the hurdy-gurdies. I think there was also a mandolin in that triplet time part around the 2-minute mark as well, which are nice, sort of alternative to the main sort of hurdy-gurdy and vocal melodies at that point. You know, there were vocals in that part, but they're more sort of like speaking to the cruiseman and everything like that. And I think that each of the different instruments were well fleshed out throughout the piece there. There was a mixture of power chord elements, sort of more chugged components, some tremolo pick parts and guitars as well. You know, we fleshed out the harmonies in the mid-range, as well as playing some compelling melodies in the gaps when we just had those kind of like chants and everything like that. And there were these kind of subtle lead lines from the guitars as well, and some of those hook sections as well, which just were a nice bit of coloration within the mix. Bass line in the bottom, full throttle, sticking with the root notes, maybe moving around outside of those as well as certain components there, but very sort of thick and full and providing a solid foundation. Drums playing a variety of different sort of quarter, eighth and 16th notes, whilst again playing those snare patterns in that sort of triplet time part to round out the main four. And I think being able to go between like the swing patterns that we had with a mixture of kick, snares and cymbals there for a lot of it, with occasional sort of fills and stuff like that, and then being able to go into more sort of like a traditional sort of like triplet straightforward groove in that interlude shows that the drummer is versatile enough to be able to handle whatever's thrown at them. And again, there was some very sort of like succulent double kick parts as well. They're moving between half time and normal time and everything like that. We understood what we were doing and kept a great sense of tempo with the band. And I think again, the hurdy-gurdy melodies were just a nice sort of alt lead to the vocals before they came in, and it represented the track well. It was an interesting tone and texture within the piece that made it sound more piratey and stylistically kind of like connected. And it's just a really complex sort of like overall theme there. I think it's trying to sort of have a sense of energy and pulse and be vivacious, whilst also incorporate those more sort of like pirate elements there, whilst also sounding heavy as hell with the combination again of those distorted bass and drum parts there. So you typically major and minor oriented with some occasional sort of like minor 7 flat 5 or something like that for a bit of edge to it, but we weren't afraid to go near the Phrygians with the flat seconds or anything like that as well. We understood our music theory and composition. I think ultimately it was more about the push and the feeling of moving forward and setting sail and the excitement of that in terms of how the instruments were played that really sort of carried this piece. Yeah, I keep clicking back to it. There's so much variety compositionally within this. There's so many cool riff ideas, and I like the fact that we weren't afraid to sort of steer away from our main element, our main idea, and sort of go between and be very fluid. It's very positive for the rest of the album. It's a great use of that 3 minutes 25, absolute no filler. And in general, with the studio production, I think that that's quite strong as well. You can clearly hear the different sort of main, sort of backing and separate vocal takes on the sides there, as well as the different guitar elements, the bass, drums, the hurdy-gurdies, and the mandolin there. You know, there's dynamic range to it. There weren't any weird resonant frequencies in the frequency spectrum, but the music surrounded you in the headphones as well. It was thick and full of life, and it was glued well, and it's nice and loud without pumping. So ultimately, a lot of these comments are probably going to be the same across these in terms of the studio production for the rest of the album, but if I notice anything extra, I'll point that out as well. But yeah, fantastic starts to proceedings, commercial grade. And we have The Rope's End, track number 2. Very sinister sounding. So get up and get to work! Very dramatic, theatrical. For last my crew, motherly dogs, lazy as hogs, led by the drink as they smartly grab their grogs. Sever the blade, though easily swayed by mates, driven by a thirst, you're prepared for the worst. So slap the deck or swing the lead around your lazy buccaneers. Ready for Great use of alternate time signatures. Definitely a little more progressive than the previous track. Not that there's anything wrong with that at all.
Kill or be killed, my men know nothing more. The first are great jack, but last to fill their drawers. These lads know nothing but killing and trading, it's in their blood. Led by the sea, to follow the pirate's creed. So slap the deck or swing the lead around your lazy buccaneers. Raise up the yard, take down the lines and be the life you chose. How good are ye to drink and in about the crew must pay their dues. Stack the cannonballs, make ready the guns for the coming battle call. Heave hold, men! Heave hold! Heave hold! Yo! Heave hold! Yo! Heave hold!
Yeah. It's huge, isn't it?
So swap the deck or swing the lead around, you lazy buccaneers. You heard the captain. Brace up the yard, tighten down the lines, just be the life you chose. How good are ye to drink and in about the crew must pay their dues. Stack the cannonballs, make ready the guns for the coming battle call.
Yeah, this was definitely more of an explorative one. Not that that's an issue, it's just it's interesting that it sounds like it's in the same album as the first track, but it's also, yeah, it just shows it's going to be a lot of range. So I think the ropes end is more about the business end of being a pirate. It's more about the expectations of taking care of the ship and getting ready for battle, and this being the life you've chose. And there's this moment where like there's this heave-ho where they're pulling on that rope as if they're really committed to the situation they're in, and that's part of the code that they're involved with. And I dig that. It's not just that we sort of have a love for our fellow brethren and we're kind of like off on a big adventure and stuff like that, but it's also invokes the seriousness of the situation that they're in, that they've really got to put their lives on the line for what they're trying to accomplish. So I think it's an interesting sort of second chapter to this piece. And the vocals continue to be compelling. Again, solid vocal technique as well. Probably similar comments as to, remember before when I was talking about the production of The River on the Coast, how I said a lot of the comments would be similar through the album format. With the vocals, I think, in addition to the main vocals being equally as consistent with the quality of the vocal fry, then as well as, again, the vocalization of the pirate captain. You have the crew just kind of singing in call and response in those hook sections there on the sides, and you kind of get that main side kind of like linkage through them, which is just really great. As a listener, it's like, oh, we're going backwards and forwards, that's kind of cool, and you're kind of like led along by that. It's very creative and very effective. But having the heave-ho bit there, which was rhythmic and worked well with the other elements within the arrangement, was great there, and it's just a nice, interesting sort of shake-up there. And I think for us to also designate the groove and time signatures to reflect the flow of the vocals in the chorus sections was a nice idea as well. It can kind of justify unusual time signatures, changes and adjustments there, because you're following the way the words work. If you had left an extra beat or an extra like 2 beats or something like that after, it would have maybe been a bit weird, but it's very much kind of, oh, we get that line's done. Oh, we're on to this one now. So I think with this one, as well as the quality of the performance, it's also the choices they made in terms of the time signatures and the way things were sort of like symbolized and implemented in a way that made sense and matters. It's another 3.5 minute piece, one which I think is absolutely phenomenal use of that time. Again, no filler in this one either. Structurally, you have different verses and choruses and like little interludes with both of these two tracks. I didn't mention that in the first one, but we have that kind of structure to it. And I think that it works well here because you get a bit more kind of context and you move back into a hook which you can follow along with. And there are plenty of instrumental breaks as well to sort of make things a bit more exciting. But there's just such a ferocious beginning to this with the chugs on the distorted guitar and then that drum fill there. And I think then you have the captain after. Yeah, so get up and get to work. It's like a showdown. It's like we're getting ready to go. We are ready to throw down, etc. And I love that heaviness to it. It's much less kind of like, oh, we're soaring through the ocean kind of vibe to this one. It's more, we're getting down to business. We're ready to throw down. So just the beginning of it is a different sort of ambience, and I appreciate that, that range there. And there's a kind of an innate bounciness to this piece there, almost like people are doing a jig, but there's the sort of guitars and metal and kind of interesting scale choices here for the harmonies and melodies. I mean, I love those little guitar leads that da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. They work well within the style of music we're doing as well as just sound groovy within the piece there, and the other power chord elements in the harmonic rhythm section back them up. And those melodies is sub-leads to the main vocal parts as well, where the vocals being more fry-oriented and less melodic. Like, they do have a sequence to them, but it's more at the tone and texture and the voicing of that as opposed to trying to get it to harmonize with those lead guitar parts. And there's these interesting moments of rhythmic unison where we have these kind of stop-starty parts there. We have a sense of flow and pace with, again, the different kick and snare and sort of like fill patterns there. But a lot of the fills kind of come from these sort of staccato or accented kind of crash kick elements, bow, bow, dun, 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 which is just a nice way to break things up in a way that isn't too stop-starty. It's like, oh, we're having a change of pace. Oh, we're going in a different direction. Oh, there is more sort of chaos on deck. We have to pull together and heave-ho, And there's like this kind of interesting bow, bow, bow. Again, the Phrygian mode, the flat second, which is a fantastically kind of intense choice there. It's in face value, boom, boom, boom. That's not a complicated concept, but it's how you integrate the different hurdy-gurdy, the organ parts there with the guitars there, and then have a sense of kind of finesse with the drum kit and bass underneath it. And there's also these kind of like chromaticisms outside of the major and minors, which I suppose will be prevalent throughout this track, considering how experimental it's being, which I think is great. It's unpredictable, and that does kind of, I think, shadow or like make sense when you consider the lifestyle that the pirates live. It's not going to be perfectly organized and kind of neat and tidy. It's going to be a little bit messy at points. So the music corresponding to that is good. And having a little bit of dissonance in that heave-ho part around the 2-minute 20 mark, I think is a good idea because it's basically saying, hey, we're basically throwing down here. It's not going to sound neat and tidy here. There's going to be some kind of glitchy, uncomfortable notes there because we're under a lot of tension to be able to pull through in the situation. It still sounds energetic and intense, and it makes sense because we're not trying to illustrate a sense of depression alongside of it, but it's just finding that equilibrium with those components that's important. So when it comes down with that bass part there with, again, the vocalist on top kind of like giving out commands, it's very much like, right, we're back to business. We've had that moment. We need to kind of get our shit together and kind of move forward. And it's nice to sort of simplify at that point, provide a sort of faux dynamic range, because we're not necessarily having the track be quieter. It just seems like it because there's less stuff going on in the mid and high ranges. And after the ho part, I just like the fact that those guitars and the hurdy-gurdy, they climb up and up and up, and then suddenly we're out of it maybe, and then boom, we're kind of moving forward with the bass line. It kind of brings you up and slams you back down. Then we have an interesting drum fill with some 16th triplets or something like that, or maybe 30 seconds. But yeah, I just think there's a lot to appreciate within this. I know these sort of mini conclusions might seem longer or maybe even too long, but it's just trying to sort of break down what's going in without repeating myself. Thematically, I think it does kind of make sense with what we've got suggested by the subject matter. The parts that we play on the instruments typically make sense with the lyrics. They match the tone, expression, and situation they're in. And I also think that I need to comment on the use of Folly. The use of Foley with these like this, you can hear the sails and the ropes and everything like that, and the ship creaking and stuff like that. And it makes it a bit more lifelike, and it adds a bit more of a sort of a professional polish to it. You can kind of imagine a situation there, and it's very classy, and I like it. And there was Folly in the previous one as well. Again, it's just absorbing everything. There's so much cool stuff to appreciate. The studio production, similar vein to that. Again, I just want to... The Foley sounds fantastic mixed in with the vocal instrumental parts there. The comment I made about the dynamic range, the faux dynamic range with the bass is because of the fact that the track is well glued together. So you can kind of take away elements at that point and it seems less kind of intense. It's just that's when you know you've got your mix, right? Is when you can get away with that and you don't have to actually artificially do too much volume automation or anything like that to get it to behave. It's very good. The EQing and no resonances is great. I think the balancing of the various sort of like kind of crew sort of like chants or harmonies there was fantastic as well, and they tonally are distinct without being too much. So yeah, well done. But we've got a count, track number 3 on a count. Keys sound fantastic here. Oh, okay, and iterating the riff there.
I was outside, me mother awakes with a bottle of wine. No father in sight to keep me in line. I had my first drink at 9. That night they came ashore, laughing so willing maniacs. I knew right then it was meant to be a pirate's life for me. Yes indeed, we're men of the sea, this life is for thee.
Interesting decision there to have that on the right side, you know.
Onslaught that night, they took me aboard, shackled me tight. The captain held my fate in his hands. Dead men tell no tales. Forced to clean and dragged through the muck. Beaten and tortured, turned and drunk. Got my first ox all right in the sea. A pirate's life for me. Yes indeed, we're men of the sea. This life is for thee. We pillage and plunder, fueled by our greed. Scream and cower and run till no end. They favor us for we're free. We're men of the sea, this life is for thee. We pillage and plunder, fueled by our greed. Scream and cower and run till no end. They favor us for we're free men. We're free men.
Slick fill there.
Sweeping the sin of the dead to a savage butcher on the sea, whispering some mutiny. The crew grew weary and looked up at me. We're men of the sea, this life is for thee. We pillage and plunder, fueled by our greed. Scream and cower and run till no end. They fear us for we're free men. We're men of the sea, this life is for thee. We pillage and plunder, fueled by our greed. Scream and cower and run till no end. They fear us for we're free men. We're men of the sea, this life is for thee. We pillage and plunder, fueled by our greed. Scream and cower and run till no end. They fear us for we're free men.
Okay, so this one was interesting. I think this track was more about journey that the main vocalist had, the pirate captain had, getting into being a pirate there. The mother, you know, the father wasn't around. The mother, it was alcohol or something like that. It just basically, the pirates came and basically he just realized it was a pirate's life for him. And it was just kind of how he got into it. And I kind of dig that. You've got a lot of what he's doing with the crew up until now, and then it's his own sort of like version of it. Yeah, makes sense within the context. It was nice to have a different style of communication there. I think it was subtle, less command-based and more kind of a recounting of it, and the expression and the way we communicated as a vocalist was good. I think that also having the backing vocalists and the hook sections chanting alongside him, almost like the pirate captain is not alone, and the pirates he's with are all kind of there with him, kind of doing what they need to do, is kind of dope as well. I think, so yeah, So yeah, the vocal performance was compelling, equal quality to previous tracks. They're very comfortable with their position on mic now, showing a polish and experience there, as well as a consistency with both the styling of expression and the vocal frying technique there, which is really positive. I think this track, in terms of its structure, it had some really interesting decisions with the mandolin, if I'm not mistaken. I liked that it had a little bit more room to sort of play around with in this. It was nice to hear it in those breaks before the chorus. Bam, ba-da-da-dum. You know, like that's a catchy little melody, and it's a symmetrical, which kind of piques your interest because it's like, why is it only on that side? And then everything kind of fawns in, and it's just really kind of like full of life. And it's cool to have that little thing kind of go in there before we go back to what we're familiar with. And it happens twice. And then I think there's also a bit later on the piece where there's some kind of offbeat, kind of mandolinish, kind of like chordal or thing that kind of goes alongside the vocals in that part, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's just on the right side, and then you've got like the pirate captain in the center around a 2-minute 30 mark, and it just makes the most of an instrument that we really haven't heard too much of yet. But I appreciate that that's more fleshed out there. It's a cool way of expressing that and putting it forward so people are aware of it, because it's been a bit subtle until now. But I think also the keys at the start. I mean, they play some interesting sort of arpeggios and melodies there, and it's sort of similar in the way we've phrased other chord progressions or ideas within this piece up until now. But for that to kind of go alongside those rolled snare drums, almost like we're leading into something, and then for the entire theme of the main guitar, bass, and drum parts to come in, for it to then iterate that theme in a separate context, but like with a similar feel to the previous tracks within it, kind of help tie it together. And I love the fact that you've got that awareness that you can have that transfer, and it's just a nice easy way to switch up the feel of an album at this point, 3 tracks in with it, because I think if you just had the same exact setup as the previous 2 immediately, it would have been too samey. So that they're aware of that, which is good. In fact, I think there was more mandolin throughout the entirety of it, and the organs, the hurdy-gurdy was following alongside of it, accounting for certain melodies, but this is more of a mandolin song. I like the fact that we're trading off those sub-leads. It's a charismatic performance across the vocals, across the piece. There's a mixture of triplet grooves there. It's lots of dynamic range, little bits, some ghost notes, and then accents in other parts there to establish a faux groove, like a quarter note pace with triplet subs. And I like that there are some chords which almost seem to resonate with ninths or something like that across the overall harmony, and it just adds a sense of brightness and a shimmer and sheen of positivity that, despite the fact that we might have had a hard life as a child there, we've eventually gotten to a brighter place. And there's a nice sort of like hurdy-gurdy melody later on. There's lots of cool ideas, but just the fact that it gets more room to spread its wings later on, and then that like kind of like they're occasional on the drums. I haven't spoken about the drums too much aside from the snare rolls at the start there. We have these interesting quick little fills that are occasional but so effective. They're not too loud or bombastic. They're just enough to kind of tide us over and go, oh, we're kind of rolling along with that, and and it's kind of like ear candy, I suppose, because the clear focus is another element that's played less, but it's like they've managed to find these sort of gaps for things, which is really cool. And there's clear identifiable main sort of sequences and ideas here that the songs are built around without straying from the too much. It was a bit less progressive and it's like experimental than the Rope's End, but I don't mind that at all. They're just finding different ways to put things. And I think a song about a person's upbringing is potentially going to need to be less chaotic in order to make it more sort of like palatable, in the sense that it's more a clear progression of how they got to where they are today, as opposed to like the drama of battle and the life or death situation. So I feel like that'll work really well for a single. The studio production is tight. Again, like I'm familiar with how this sounds now, and across these 3 tracks, it's clear they've been mastered together. The leveling, mixing in general is good. When we came down with those little mandolin parts and the breaks before the choruses there, it was just another example of there being gaps for the sake of listener enjoyment, as well as making the chorus a bit heavier when it comes in, which is solid. Sometimes people do like sub drops and stuff like that to do it, but I feel like that might just be a little bit kind of like derivative and antithetical to the experience here, so I like that balance there. But yeah, no, honestly, again, nice and loud without pumping, great groove to it. The dynamics aren't ruined by over-compressing or limiting it, so it's great. Well done. I think I've said well done a few times now. I'll try and find other words to say, but we've got Sunt Dracones.
There be tales of the things we see. We are free men. There be myths of the deep, dark sea. We are free. There be hydras and Titans, Dragons and Sirens.
Phenomenal solo here.
Tales of the things we see. We are free men. There be myths of the deep, dark sea. We are free.
So I think that Hic Sunt Dracones was a fantastic little interlude, I suppose, being a minute long. Really effective. It's just the crew, the captain and the crew doing like a call and response, singing together I don't know if the shanty's the right word, but like a hymn, a song about there being free man and the journey they're going on and all the things they could come across. You know, there'd be like sirens and krakens and stuff like that. And I just like the fact that they're kind of like doing really interesting things with the vocals now, where they have them on a specific position of the frequency spectrum, and then they'll be in the center and then to the side. It makes it sound huge, and almost it's more exciting because like they could have just had everything in the center. You know, it's these little things that the attention to detail and post which matter, but it's also staging them from a performance perspective to make sense and have different vocal textures and timbres, different people singing different parts, to make it seem like it's different members of the crew. But it's so full-bodied when you have the entire crew singing together. I love the tone of that and how it's positioned within the mix. I think it's really great. And it got a lot of body to it. And it works really well alongside the mandolin here, which gets a lot more room to breathe here as the main sort of instrumental component here alongside those. You got like little whistly kind of synth bits, I think, at the end. They're either whistles or they're synth bits. But either way, I love the tone of the whistles and how sort of like subtle they are. And you've got the Foley of the boat as it kind of creaks and everything like that. You can hear the sound of the ship and you can imagine people in that situation. Again, it's really well done. But to have that chord progression strummed or plucked there like that in a way where it's kind of like works with a lot. Dun 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 dun. It's still a triplet groove there. A straightforward kind of triplet groove, but to have the solo section in the middle with little slides and like hammer-ons or pull-offs there and some chromatics with some bluesy elements and stuff, it's just really neat. And it's not an expected thing. Often what people would do from songs I've heard is that people have like a little kind of break there, or they just have the instrument just play the chords again without it, and then someone like talks over top. To have its own sort of like solo in the middle is just such great use of time. And it's the first time we've had a mandolin solo within this album as well. So it's just another way of expressing our range in that regard. But yeah, I think the theme of it is more sort of supportive of the vocals there, and it's the excitement of the story being told as well as the adventure they're about to continue with that matters, and you just get a moment of peace before the next song. In terms of the studio production, fantastic balance across the board there. It shows they can mix a lot of things as well as work well with just a few key components. Sometimes if you remove something, the track can sound a little bit emptier because there was something kind of tying it together here, but they've got things well enough sort of acquainted with or without that it sounds complete. You didn't need more elements than this. Just the Foley and the vocals and the mandolin was tight. So yeah, well done with Hic Sunt Dracones. We have No Quarter, track number 5. And back to the distorted guitars. Savage.
Motel for the motel for us all. Bloodthirsty men we be in search of a hole. Let me upon us for a ship appeared before us. A call to arms, fetch me my blunderbuss. Swinging the heads from the main for all to see. The throats is junk, thrown overboard for feed. No quarter shot and begin that blood of all the smithereens. Spread
ferocious. The time sickness is kind of a little bit quirky here, but it's consistent in its quirkiness.
At last we're put to the test. A pirate's left for us, except for the rest. If we die, then we die. There be no parlay. Strike the colors. Watch them quiver in dismay. Swinging the heads from the main for all to see. The corpse is junk, thrown overboard for feed. No quarter shall be given, blood of all to smithereens. Spreading misery and red throughout the sea. The order has been given, blood of all to smithereens.
It is interesting how bouncy at this point is. Almost like we're excited for battle.
Is chum thrown overboard for fee. No quarter shall be given, blood of all to smithereens. Spreading misery and red throughout the sea. No order has been given, blood of all to smithereens. Looky, lads, what do we have here? Rum!
Excellent. Fantastic. So I think that No Quarter, track number 5, is more about getting ready for battle, preparing for, No Quarters are kind of like, a focus on plundering and taking what we have, and then they have the battle near the end, and then they enjoy it with rum. And that's effectively what you've got here, You had that moment of quiet with Sunt, Dracones, where like they're singing together as quietly on the ship, and then just bam, that's just straight into it. And what I think works so well here is it's not just that, again, the vocal quality is tight here, the performance is solid, but it's also like you can hear how charismatic the captain is. It sounds like they're really an actual pirate captain going away and sort of like talking to their crew, and you get them at the end, looky what we have here with rum, and they're chanting rum, and it's just so good. It's just so authentic, and it's what you need in this situation. I just don't think you can do an album like this unless you're fully invested in it, and there's a clear passion from the band that's like making this music, and I love that to pieces. I have a lot of respect for that. It makes it more enjoyable when they really care. So I think that in general, like compelling performance on the mic across the board, including the spoken parts or the chanted parts at the end there. Another 3-minute track. They're acutely aware of using their time effectively. And again, there's absolutely no filler. At the start, the guitar comes in asymmetrically on the left, which is again like, we're only doing it on that side. And then everything comes in and there's like a hurdy-gurdy guitar, bass, drum sort of focus kind of thing going on there, where everything kind of niches together with those triplets. And like there's great use of space after the da-da-da-duns. Like they're not afraid to ever use the space, almost like we're preparing for battle there, like setting things up, and it's very kind of like a boss battle. But there's also these melodies with like the guitar and the hurdy-gurdies playing the same notes, and there's like a menace to them, but it always sounds excited, like they're ready for battle. In a lot of situations where there's like a big sort of like conflict, there'll be like a heaviness, sort of be kind of like either lethargic because of the struggle, or to be overtly aggressive here, but they managed to make it exciting. And around that 147 mark with the dun 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 dun, kind of like the what's the word for it? There's like this interesting kind of like menace to the bumpa 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 bum. Like they're so excited about the impending sort of like impact that they're dancing around with it, But then you have this heaviness with those harmonized guitar leads, they're sort of tremolo picking away there. It's just, you hear the sounds of the clashing of the swords and everything like that, and people kind of like going at each other, and it does sound like a war zone with the double kicks and how kind of vivacious everything is. And you got like the captain laughing over top, and it's just so like believable. And then the battle ends, the captain at a lower kind of register talking about the corpses they're like floating. It's just, it's brutal. But then you have the excitement of the rum and everything kind of levels around. So really neat song there with more of an active progression here, and I like the fact that you could hear it, listen, identify what's going on, tell the story matches, and it's solid, man. Again, I haven't really commented on the actual quality of the performance from the instruments yet, but they're very tight. Like, these are very capable instrumentalists that are getting the most out of their instruments and being able to do things with it that I wouldn't have necessarily expected, but that are so palatable and niche so well with each other. Because it's one thing to be able to write music like this where there are sort of like twists and turns and slightly unconventional or unpredictable time patterns and signatures, and they repeat those kind of quirky patterns, and it kind of makes more sense over time, I suppose. Almost like, again, the unpredictability of battle or getting ready for it. But then to also be able to normalize it and just have yourself bopping away with it regardless, and having it be more sort of steady when it matters, that's a nuance that takes time to develop. So yeah, honestly, a tight sort of instrumental performance, things just transition seamlessly. The studio production is just fantastic as well. Typically the parts that we had per section matched well with the lyrics and how they coalesced, so that was good. There were no moments where I heard like chord progressions or melodies or like drum parts and I was like, why are we having that here? Like it's rational. And so you're left with a final comment that at this near halfway point, it's just been a really solid album so far, and it does I feel invested in this pirate adventure. And again, having just the recording clean enough on a final note to be able to have just the vocals and then the chants and you could hear the water, to be able to have it clear enough that it sounds like you might be listening to like a movie like audio or something like that is just fantastic. You can imagine it in your head. It's very vivid. But we've got Nelson's Folly, track number 6. Great follow on from No Quarter. So that was another shorter track, which I think was effective. It follows on from the rum components of the previous track there, No Quarter. And it's more like a celebration, I suppose, of the fact that we did get through that and we're kind of like just celebrating together, after Conquest. And it's like super heavy. It's not positive. It's not a major sounding performance. I think a lot of the power comes from the vocals going together, chanting the rum and the ooh, that kind of melody that's hummed alongside it in that second half of each take. It's a very steady yet powerful and poignant sort of overall kind of concept or theme that almost signals that it's at an end and we're just stopping for the moment. But then when the music cuts out, you realize it's just the pirates themselves drinking the rum together and then celebrating that. You realize that a lot of the music maybe portends to the conflict that they've gone through, and that at the end it's just themselves coming down from that and sort of like, yeah, I do think the music is a lot of what the music is trying to sort of relate to is the actual situation that they're in. It's great that we know when to stop the instrumental parts behind a vocal performance to allow it to us also be able to enjoy the harmonies there. The harmonies are intricate in how they're layered there. And just very pleasant to listen to. Again, stylistically, expressively appropriate, consistent, but also they stand on their own, and it's great with or without the backing. And that big kind of like note the ooh, and for the guitars, bass, and drums to kind of fade out like that. It's just a, yeah, we're done. We're at the halfway point there. And so I just think structurally for the album, that's an interesting decision as well. To have had this much kind of information already, despite only having about 15 minutes worth of music, is stunning. And it kind of makes us wonder what's going to happen with the rest of it. And then for track 7, we have Old Stumbles, which is crazy fast.
I yell to the men, slice a main brace. No hesitation to crack a bottle. Doesn't take long to see the ground blossom. Well deserved for well-fought battle. My sea legs escape me, flounder like a fish. A clap of thunder strikes me down, dumbfounded. Yet I live to break again. Rage of last, now saying folly. Drink it to those we lost at sea. We stumble and fight, even spill a brew. So keep your own close, thirsty be a crew. Another round of now saying folly. I run and take ship, we lost at sea. We stumble and fight, even spill a brew. So keep your own close, or we'll drink yours too.
I see.
Another drunken fool. Many a drinking games turn swiftly into duels. Folly grew from the boons hit the ground. The men they crafter makes a thing and dance around. 15 men on a dead man's chest. Yo ho ho and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil be done. Rage of last.
Pirate stuff is so cool, man.
Drink it to those we lost at sea. We stumble and fight, even spill a brew. So keep your own close, thirsty be your crew. Another round of now saying folly. I run and take ship, we lost at sea. We stumble and fight, even spill a brew. So keep your own close, or we'll drink yours too.
Nice sort of vibe shift, though.
Drink, 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 drink.
Kind of need to have a breakdown with a drinking game.
Rage of last, now saying folly. Drink it to those we lost at sea. We stumble and fight, even spill a brew. So keep your own close, thirsty be your crew. Another round of now saying folly. I run and take ship, we lost at sea. We stumble and fight, even spill a brew. So keep your own close, or we'll drink yours too.
Fantastic. Great track. So that was Old Stumbles, a song I think is about getting drunk and having drinking games with the pirates, and Nelson's Folly, I assume, being the rum. And if you don't keep your rum close, they'll drink yours too. You had interesting sort of like a discussion of like people being overboard and getting into duels because of drinking games and stuff like that. It's kind of wild to think about, you know, you get through that big battle and you take it and suddenly you're dueling other people over drinking games. It's an interesting dynamic though. It's really cool that we were able to kind of just have a track just start so ferociously as it did. But I think before we go into that, vocally, again, another really competent performance there. It was great to have, again, the person, like the crew member on the side, talking about the person going overboard there. And it's just like, oh, this is the side of the ship. Suddenly we're hearing it to the right. And so like we hear it and we go, okay, is there anything they could have done better vocally? And I think at this point in time, like they've got things thoroughly sorted in that regard. You kind of like, if you're familiar with the pirate captain, you're familiar with the sound of the crew and the individuals as well who are sort of saying certain things and going alongside it. It's very sort of like consistent with the rest of the album. And so you go to the track itself in terms of variation structurally. And again, as I mentioned, you have that ferocious part at the start. Almost like the kind of the ferocity of that is meant to insinuate that things have kind of spiraled out of control then after Nelson's Folly. And it's just we've just gone full on drinking mode there. We're discussing how we're kind of getting drunk and we can't sort of stand properly and everything like that. And the music kind of like, what it does really neatly is it kind of goes down with the captain a little bit. It kind of like teeters and totters a little bit and sort of sounds unsure of itself. And then it kind of goes down in semitonal increments to illustrate that. But then there's also a sense of celebration with the combination of the hurdy-gurdies and guitars and everything with the da-da-da-dun-dun-dun-dun. It's like a minor Orient. It's not a happy joy track, but it's like vibrant in the mid and upper range there with the glow of things, and it's almost like we're celebrating the chaos there. I think the use of the chromatics with the hurdy-gurdy around the 1 minute 20 part with the drink be done bit is really cool, because it's like insinuating that there is a sense of uncertainty or that things are just not totally balanced there, and the use of chromatics is a chaotic sort of sound, especially when they come roll up one across each other. And playing around with those ideas whilst having more sort of like straightforward sections helps you to understand specific parts of the vocalist or the lyrics are talking about. And it kind of gives people who are less sort of comfortable with that and understanding that there will be the more sort of regular stuff a bit later on. It's an interesting instrumental section around the 155 part, because you got these kind of dual lead guitar subleads, and the interlude they choose, boom, boom, is like a seventh or something like that, right? And it's like the mandolin goes alongside that, and you got the snare rolls and everything like that, almost like we're marching into something after those drinking games. It's like a breakdown, I suppose, or a lead into the breakdown of people just having that kind of big situation. Except because of the pitch of like the mandolin, it sounds like pretty in a weird way, and it's almost like it's a little bit kind of discombobulated. Things are meant to be heavy but like playful at the same time. But just have an extended instrumental section, especially within a short time frame of 3 minutes 10, is really cool. You know, we are aware that we only maybe need so much. Now with 15 on a Dead Man's Chest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum, you know, you've got that there. You've got piratey things going on and being said in mantras, and a description of the situation we're in. And it's done within like a minute and a half to appreciate the other instrumental parts. And it's just nice balancing there, and it shows that we trust the backing as much as the lead. Ultimately, you know, I like the mixture of different sort of chord positions, as well as the use of chromatics and other sort of like triadal parts there. And the breakdown was a little bit alternative and kind of like different, but I think that it works well for the subject matter and context. I think having like a quote unquote brutal breakdown wouldn't have necessarily suited it too much. And I think that having that really quick part with the galloping at the beginning, it kind of like, you wouldn't have wanted that to be the whole of the song. It just would have sounded a little bit too different to the rest of the album. So I appreciate how kind of intense it was at the beginning, but how it kind of came back into it. It kind of brings you out of it. It's like, oh, what's happening here? And then bam, you know, you smack into it. So ultimately, just a quite well-written track with a lot of interesting ideas put into here. Studio production, recording, mixing, mastering is similar quality as well. Great sense of dynamic range to parts there, but sort of firm, seamless transitions between parts. And yeah, honestly, sounds commercial grade. We got Greco's Blunderbuss, track number 8. Kind of meandering, but I dig it. Oh boy. I mean, sorry to interrupt, but that vomiting was visceral. That, again, is so good at, if you are unsure what the situation is, they firmly remind you. Oh, and it lumbers.
Can be a dead man's curse, turning about the briny deep, there ain't no land, ho! We're broken men, struck down by our thirsty tongues, scourge of the 17th, we still press on! Alas, the wind smiles upon us!
Hey. Phenomenal there. So, I mean, like, Greco's Blunderbuss was almost a tale of two halves, where, like, the first 2 minutes of it, roughly, were discussing the awful situation we're there in, where after the party of old stumbles, with the water and the whiskey is dried up, and we've got nothing, and we're struggling, we're vomiting, and we're at sea, and we just want land, and we just want to get out of this, and we're just struggling and scared, you know. But then they press on, and at that point in the story, you get that wind change, you can hear the Folly of it, and it's like the captain calls out and things gallop, and suddenly things are a lot more positive and ambitious, and then we're back into it, where they press on and they got through it. And I think that's a really important thing to do in an album like this, where we can't just endlessly romanticize life at sea. We have to also accept that there was probably a lot of throwing up and vomiting and a lot of misery and components depending on how you were at sea, you know. And I think that just having this sort of chronologically after that makes a lot of sense. And it's got a sort of sense of kind of like a dark comedy to it. But I do appreciate structurally that we had that at the end. I think you could, the excitement, the acting, the way we communicated, that the winds had changed, that smiled upon us, was just, it was wonderful. They're really sold on it. They're really invested. I think that's what you've got to do in this situation. In terms of like the structure of the track, it's a shorter one than a lot of the other ones, but no less useful with its time. I don't think we missed any context here. I can't imagine we would have benefited from having more. You have that kind of rolling guitar riff at the start, which kind of starts almost like, it's like the ship stops starting. Like we move a little bit and then we're kind of in a state of almost paralysis due to the fact we don't really know what we can do to move forward. And it's this constant sort of like sense of like almost menace to this track, with the way that the leads kind of pop off, down, those melodies, they clearly do not indicate that people are having a good time. You literally have the Foley as well of people vomiting on the side of the headphones, which is visceral. And there's these kind of hurdy-gurdy elements that like play notes that land on those lead guitars or rhythm guitar parts, those riffs, and they do not sound pleasant. There are some flat seconds. It's very kind of gruesome and gritty, and I think it suits the mood described in the lyrics well. And I think you've also got some like pad-like element occurring in the background with a lot of these kind of like breakdowns or riffs, and it's kind of very dreary, and there's a sense of misery or depression about it. Even in the chorus section, which is upbeat with the triplet double kicks and the hurdy-gurdy popping off, and like the energy of the vocals is palpable, it's still not a specifically sort of like positive sounding environment. And it's da-da-da-dun-da-dun-da-dun-da-dun, kind of working with that like diminished or that seventh there. Yeah, it's like a flat seventh or something like that going into it. It even insinuates when we're trying to make something a bit more kind of up-tempo that we are still struggling. And I think the reason that we had that tempo shift in that last part, though, I haven't mentioned that, after they find the wind, the things get a bit faster and this kind of galloping riff, similar to the start of Old Stumbles, but it's almost like the music is trying to sort of replicate the feeling that the people have in those parts. And it's like with Old Stumbles, if we hadn't had the drinking party, we might have felt better. I'm not sure, but it gets back to that. It's faster, and the last chord progression, the way things are played is very different. And it's such a cool sounding groovy riff. It's so full sounding, and there's less of the kind of like dissonant or like uncomfortable kind of offbeat patterns that we had with some of the hurdy-gurdy parts in the previous choruses of the track. So it's just more straightforward. We're focused again. We're on to the main task. So another really great track, great use of 2 minutes 34, and the studio production as per the rest of the album so far is just top tier. I appreciate that we are playing with different tempos in the track as well. It shows we aren't just committed to a click the entire time, and just having separate sections at different tempos displays a sense of creativity that helps it stand out. You know, you don't always get tracks split in two like this with different tempos, but it makes sense with the context. I appreciate that. We've got Phrygian Frigate, track number 9.
Been spotted. Come about. Bring a spring up on our gable.
Going away from swing. Interesting decision to go back to swing there. Oh, brutal. For the cannons, you see. Now that's a great use of a sub drop there. For the explosion there, it's very effective. And so we're back in the full swing now. We're back in the full swing now. So yeah, honestly, Phrygian Frigate, track number 9. Seems to be a track about people being totally up for taking down the ship that they spot on the horizon, be the last ship they ever see, getting ready to fire the cannon, and then boom, they're straight into it. I think it's kind of cool to like have the emotional roller coaster that we're having with this album so far, with the vocalist, with the band sort of describing how they're ready to continue and they got through that difficulty there and they're on to the next thing. And I think that it makes sense here. It does make me wonder how we're going to end this though, so that will be interesting. But the fact that I'm thinking about how we're going to end it is indicative of the fact that this is an effective album. I'm invested in the story without even necessarily trying to. It's like I'm just curious at this point. I liked when he sort of said fire, and I know this is potentially a basic thing to say, but I liked how when he said fire, and then you had the cannonball go off, the explosion there. Now, it's also simultaneously probably a studio production thing, but there was a definite kind of push on the limiter and mastering chain when that explosion went off, which is the specific and ideal reason you'd have a sub drop there for it to sound like an explosion. It affects the way that the overall track sounds there. I just thought it was nice to have that before that explosion there to kind of tie it together. It's not a super complicated or unexpected thing, especially as we become more and more familiar with the way they write and sort of perform and produce and sort of communicate with us. Even at the start, though, with the captain, the ship has been spotted, and you get that excitement. The journey continues, and before we even get to the main part of the track, we're kind of led into it. And I think structurally, it's a really interesting track for a few different reasons. The first is that you have the kind of the straightforward 4/4 with the quarters, eighths, and sixteenths after the ship's spotted. And it's very different to the swing groove based on the triplets you have for a lot of other things within this album. And I think that the reason for that is that they're trying to sort of mirror the speed of the ship heading towards its target. I think that anticipation that's meant to be what that is. And I think that is inherently a really cool idea. It's just very kind of like, it catches you by surprise because you're used to the bounciness of the swing grooves there. But it's clever nonetheless, and it's very tight with the performance with some interesting 30-second note kicks, if I'm not mistaken, at the end of each take. And then it gets back into the swing groove with the triplets and the kind of the vocal fry and the captain calling out in those verse parts to be more piratey, which makes sense. It's very shanty-ish, but just combining those two was cool. And there are these really subtle guitar leads throughout the piece as well. I think at this point, it's me more describing, with an understanding that a lot of my other comments are consistent across the track, describing certain elements of these pieces that are additional to a tight guitar performance well fleshed out between the rhythms and the sub leads there. Having these kind of sub-leady guitar parts go underneath the vocals, which again it's more about the texture, the tone, the rhythm, and the accenting of them. Adds a bit more flavor and is a nice sort of counter rhythm to some of the stuff that we've got going on with the drums in terms of the quarters and triplet accents. And there are these kind of like interesting parts where we have these half-time or like just these kick-oriented ones with the guitars panning out, and then we have fire, and then there's like a breakdown. And what happens in that last little part there after the explosion is you have this subtle guitar lead that's doing bends, and it's a really interesting place to put a guitar solo because it's not like it is really a guitar solo. We haven't really had a guitar solo in this. The mandolin part we had in Dracones, if I'm not mistaken, was like more sort of like substantial than that. I'm wondering if we are going to get a guitar solo at some point, like a dedicated one. But here it's very sort of nuanced, almost like you're hearing the cries of the people far away from the other ship or something like that, and that's them calling out as you bombard them with cannons. But again, like, it's another track which is very similar to the previous ones with its main grooves, but it's just the change between the main 4/4 and swing tempos that I appreciate here. It's a bit more consistent here than previous ones in terms of the tempos and like the fluidity of things. It's not stop-starty. It really does kind of sound like we as pirates have adopted a seamless, effortless transition from being battle ready to battling. And that experience is shown from the pirates within the music from this track, which is kind of intriguing. There are twists and turns harmonically with the way we go between the majors and minors and power chord elements and the way the hurdy-gurdies and mandolins and everything else pop off. But ultimately, yeah, really satisfying. This track is more about the experience of the chase to capture more than anything else. I think studio production-wise, I mentioned it was like the Folly of the cannonball firing off. But it's also just allowing things to be a little bit quieter at the start when the crewmate is speaking to the cabin, to the captain, should I say. Allowing things to be a bit quieter before we get into the heavy part is great. It kind of builds anticipation a little bit, especially if you're used to the relative loudness of the track up until this point. So I'm glad they're adopting that. Again, it's really cool. And we have The Locker, track number 10. I want to mention something in a moment. Sorry to interrupt. I'll go back a little bit. Just when I mean that we haven't had a dedicated guitar solo yet, that isn't even insinuating that I think that the music would be better with one. It's just often you will have a guitar solo before like a mandolin solo or something like that. But I think here having the hurdy-gurdies and the mandolins who might sort of signify more relation to the style of music in terms of the middle. I mean, there are a lot of guitar solos in middle. So I think it's probably better or more appropriate for these other ones to sort of take up the lead there. And I think we also have a lot of complexity to some of these guitar riffs anyways. They're kind of spicy riffs and I enjoy the tone of them, you know?
Awake my blade up, get the jump from my boots. As we slay the rest, we grapple the men to meet their end. Charred souls, flesh of their bones, bodies full of lead. Screams of pain, we laugh amongst the dead. The earth is okay, the smell of death fills the air. The future elements will cease from life unless they're men. To them the shipwreck, a piece is sent upon the sea. An offer to fill his locker, to fill his greed. The acrid smoke clears, the smell of death fills the air. The future elements would seize the life of lesser men. For lives and shipwreck, to blazing tide upon the sea. An offer to fill his locker, a toast to victory. The ships like terror war, with flesh and bones among the wreck.
Great to have a drum break in there.
Through the wreckage, pushing aside the countless dead. A barrel is found, my wrong preferred, mixed with blood. A bloated graveyard, all souls have been judged. The earth is full the smell of death fills the air. The future elements will cease from life unless they're men. To them the shipwreck, a piece is sent upon the sea. An offer to fill his locker, to fill his greed. The acrid smoke clears, the smell of death fills the air. The future elements would seize the life of lesser men. For lives and shipwrecks, a blazing tide upon the sea. An offer to fill his locker, a toast to victory.
Fantastic. I mean, it's ferocious, isn't it? It's more about the environment created rather than having a specific lead. Well done with the key change. Double rations for all the men. So the locker, I think Davy Jones's locker, the song is more about the fact that after approaching the frigate, they overtook it, and the smell of death in the men, a lot of people dying. And it's horrific, but it's part of the pirate lifestyle, and we knew what we were getting into from the start. So I think it's really cool to have a song literally follow on from the thing maybe 20 minutes before. It is actually very rare, at least from my experience as a reviewer, to have things be so tight like that. Often there's distance, but this kind of seems like it's a part 2 of the track, but I also understand why it was not in the same sequence. It was a separate concept, the idea of both coping with the fact that these people had died and we were the Grim Reaper effectively, or the Grim Reaper had come for them, but also celebrating the fact that with their death came our victory and we get the spoils from that with the double rations and stuff. There's an incredible amount of menace with that opening guitar riff there, but I suppose a lot of the comments about the vocals are ones similar to ones I've made so far. The quality of vocal performances across the board are great. Actually, no, I will comment on the chanted vocals in the first half of the chorus. I'm wondering if those vocals from the crew members were just a little bit too low in the register. I didn't necessarily hear all the words clearly. It seemed like there was just a bit of resonance in that part because we're trying to do too much in that area, so the words didn't come through as clearly, I think. It wasn't that it sounded bad or anything like that. I still liked the idea. I thought it was a cool concept. But when we got up into our mid-range for the hummed parts, the hummed melodies underneath the captain, it was a bit more easy to sort of tell what was going on there. So that's just something I'll mention here. I'm not even sure if that's constructive critique because it would also potentially depend on like what you're listening through it and stuff like that. But still, I think the fact that we went low made sense because then it made the second half where we kind of hum or sing the higher melody make a lot more sense. So that's totally fine. To have the crew chant to victory at the end of the time and for someone to say double rations and then for there to be nothing after it for like 4 seconds as if it was just done is kind of cool as well. A lot of the time with this album, we've tried to sort of hint or lead on to another track after it, but we're just simply celebrating the fact that we were able to kind of end things, and it does signal that we're getting into our final act at this point. I don't know how we're going to sort of like fill it up in the space of 3 minutes, but we'll find out. We will find out. But yeah, just the vocals in general, top tier, very happy with them. Just that bit of point that it pointed out. But moving on from that, the actual way that was written and constructed structurally, 3 minutes 18, great use of time there. Flesh things out really neatly with the mixture of different guitarist bass lines and sort of like we had more guitar activity here. I know I mentioned the lack of talked about the guitar stuff here, but I appreciate the different directions that those sort of like lead lines worked with in that interlude section especially, and how after you kind of focus on that and there's all this kind of, it's not cacophonous, but there's like a lot of stuff going on with some sort of like sub-layering from the hurdy-gurdies even there. They're a bit quieter, almost creating this kind of like this immense amount of tension with the death and destruction. But then they rise up and go up a key signature, and then I think they are focused on the victory at that point. And just musically, that's a really cool idea. It's saying, hey, look, I know there's been all this horrific stuff that's occurred, but we won, we victory, so that's good, it was worthwhile. And the music and the vocals are gelling into that. And I just think that's a great direction to go in that kind of sucker punches you in a positive way. There's a lot of kind of like grit and angst to these riffs as we struggle through it and talk about these people in the lives, the lesser men in the lives that are lost. With like a typical minor leaning throughout there, you know, with mixtures and sort of like twists and turns as for most of this album. I also want to sort of talk about an interesting kind of thing that occurred before that kind of breakdownish part with the more active guitar elements there. Is that a polka? Is it polka music? Is there polka music going on with the hurdy-gurdy? Am I wrong? I've been thinking about this entire time, and it's kind of a it sounds like something you can kind of jig along, almost like it's the Dance of the Dead or something like that. You discuss all these people that have died, and it's kind of a perverse kind of situation there, where they're kind of hinting that it's maybe been worthwhile and they're happy that it's done. It's like they're kind of nodding to both things at once musically, but to have the hurdy-gurdy on the offbeats there is just kind of cool because it almost makes the one and of each beat more important. And you've got the la 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 la, the kind of crew kind of chanting along to that. Again, it's very playful, great sort of like personality to it there. It really doesn't take itself too seriously. I think that there's just a lot of angles you can take this in, and they managed to find the right sort of like balance there, and it's open regardless in a way that makes sense. So structurally fascinating. Again, love the key change near the end there. It's a plot twist, and I think that, again, finishing, we'll probably be going into the double rations part next for 11, but just studio production-wise, again, fantastic. And my comment about the lower harmonies in the first part of the chorus isn't a studio production thing. Like, it's not an EQ thing in terms of, like, a resonance done incorrectly in the EQing or notching. It's just more that you've got a lot going on down there, so it's less discernible. But I think the captain repeats those lines a bit later on before the double rations for everyone part there, so you kind of get it anyways. But no, still very well done. We've got double rations, track number 11.
There, Captain. 'Twas he who cut me arm off. Oh, I had waited long to shake hands with him with this. My hook, my lovely hook. 'Tis a worth of common sore of common hands. I am the well mother, pray me to keep with this. Make
Together!
Excellent. Double rations. Together. That caught me by surprise. Very effective. It sounds like someone smacked on the table, right? That was at the end of that, right? Okay, so let's talk about double rations. Musically, very kind of like minimalist. But then it's kind of not. You've got like a bom-ba-ba kind of polka situation going on there where it's very pleasant and works with the triads there. And it, again, suits stylistically with the kind of music they were making there. And it's a nice sort of palate cleanser from a lot of the heavy stuff we've had previously for people wanting a kind of a moment of intermission there with people literally eating and talking. And I think part of what I appreciate about this track and what's done here is that it is simply... It sounds like a mess room of pirates having a chat and eating food and just sort of enjoying themselves and kind of talking about things and maybe humming along a little bit to the instruments that are playing. And it's just great. It's just so cool that we managed to create that environment in there that's just so easy to visualize. You have the sound foley, the people with the crowds there, the things that are leveled like that. And there's such an organic thing as well. There's such love put into it, such passion. They're really good at this. So when the captain comes in at the end and says, you know, like, what did he say at the end? Together. Yeah, together. You know, like, together. He's just like a toast or something, I suppose, along those lines for the next part. But it's just so believable. And the way that it's produced in terms of studio production, it's not leveled in a way which is meant to be musical. It's meant to sort of be a representation of them eating that. And it's just simply that. And the fact that they can do both song production as well as create those ambiances is not, that's advanced stuff. That's not easy to do. To make it make sense within an album is difficult, and I managed to do that here. It's awesome. And you have like some string sections as well instrumentally there, and we have some plucked mandolin components as there repeating on the motif as we go through, and there's again occasionally some humming from other people within like the mess hall, but it's just for 40 seconds there's so much. You get this world there, and I love it. It's great. We got the captain though. What is the captain gonna say? Oh, it's building into that. Polyrhythms or polymeter? No, it's not.
Do you hear that? Such a sound that flows with the wind. A deathly breeze has grasped at our souls. Hearts beating to a rhythm of fear. A strange voice that's calling us near. Many things I've seen, for a sinner I've been. A face in the tide as the air grows thin. As we fell for her spell, her calling her gently from the deepest of hell. Held captive and mesmerized, her body's deadened. For she sang her tune, a song to our end.
Oh.
Shallow lake for this creature has a fin. A serpent's tongue as it feeds on weaker men. Steady, her two fortunes in our blades. A watery demise awaits if we stray. Beauty be deaf as we fell for her spell. Her calling her gently from the deepest of hell. Held captive and mesmerized, her body's deadened. For she sang her tune, a song to our end.
Oh, they fell into the water.
Ships wrecked among the rocks are thrown about.
Oh.
By the waves and rolling tide, in living there is doubt. Her face among the wreckage, puzzled I am. I thrust my sword, for it is she who is damned. Beauty be deaf as we fell for her spell. Her calling her gently from the deepest of hell. Held
That's horrific, man. I don't like that. I don't like that. That's a sad ending, man. They do all this stuff as pirates, and then they come across the Siren, the thing they spoke about, and Sunt Dracones, and they get just wasted by her. It sucks. I'm annoyed by that, but it's what it is, man. It's incredibly effective stuff. You know, you care about these people. So that was the Siren's call. They start humming away, everyone hums away, and then they hear the Siren's call, and it all hell breaks loose, effectively. And they end up, I think the ship ends up sort of beached. It goes against the rocks. And yeah, they end up, I think, drowning. Or I think maybe he gets out of it alive, or maybe that's him singing and he dies after, I'm not sure. But either way, it's just brutal, dude. I think part of what works so well about this is that you can kind of hear the fear in the singer as they describe the danger that they're in. They're acutely aware of it. They've seen a lot of terrible things, but this is the worst. And they know that their voice is from hell, but they're accepting that they can't really fight it. And, you know, just you hear the crew members with the captain for most of it. But after the ship gets stranded, it's just the captain. And they're not doing well. It's so intuitive because why would you expect everyone else to be with the captain if they've drowned? You know, it's just, there's been a lot of thought put into it. And it's just, you hear them murmuring away at the end and you're left in a position where you don't know what's going to happen. And again, for it to go from double rations, everyone's so happy after they got their food, to just dying. It really does kind of showcase just how fragile life is. I think what kind of makes it so spooky is the Siren's voice that you can hear throughout each of the chorus sections. It's just so foreboding, like it's beautiful, it's mesmerizing, but you contrast it with the way they're singing about it. It's just, it's visceral, dude, but so effective. And you've got, again, the strummed parts there, the organ at the start of the track with the whole crew chanting together. And then as the Siren comes in, it gets full bore with distorted guitars, bass, and drums, and it just turns into a full song. And there's like almost a Halloween-esque kind of spooky tone to the hurdy-gurdy as you move through the piece there. Like in that halfway point, like it just sounds like you're just gonna have a terrible time, or that you're gonna meet your doom there with the note choices there. And the guitars, bass, and drums stay with the captain throughout the entire time, as if this is his story the entire time, and the band is surrounding him. Everything else just kind of gets filtered a little bit at one point, almost like it sounds like everything's underwater. And I just don't know how to feel about it. I mean, like it's more of a traditional or regular composition from these guys, but it's also unique because of that production, because of the Simon quotient, because of the themes of it and lyrics discussed. And there's almost like this funeral march at the end there around the 2:30 part there, where he talks about thrusting his sword and everything like that. And it's gruesome, it's horrific, it's so spooky. And it makes sense for what we're discussing here, and it just shows the versatility of instruments like the hurdy-gurdy and everything like that to be able to instill those themes there with those chord choices, those diminished chords, those kind of ferocious triads. The way the mood is established is really cool. And around like the 2:08 mark, there's also this really kind of like scary sounding guitar lead or something along those lines, or it's like a synth or something like that. And it's just like, oh, it makes kind of quiver. Like it is very ghostly. It is very ghostly. You do get the feeling we're coming to an end from those decisions. And then you get like the guitar and everything like that fading out at the end with the sound of the water and the chants on the sides, and you don't know where things are at. And honestly, one of the most incredibly compelling. Studio production, fantastic, great leveling kind of things in terms of like the filtering when like the ship goes underwater and everything like that, the fade out at the end, the automation of the volume of that. It's heavy, cinematic, theatrical, the best way you could have done it. I don't know how you can improve on this. It's so polished, and it's just, yeah, honestly, got nothing better to say about it. Honestly, again, commercial grade, as we said before, and they should be proud of themselves for their studio production. But we've got one final track titled Beached.
I had a ship and crew. It was all that I knew. We sailed the 7 seas. Meant everything to me. It was a proper night. Burning everything in sight. As we raised our swords attacked them as a horde. We lost our way in the great big tide. She swallowed us whole and kept our souls. We're spit back out, adrift at sea. It looked all the same to me.
An acoustic feel, I think, is appropriate. But it's incredibly sad sounding.
A storm was brewing fast. Lightning struck it down the mast. My crew looked upon to me as the ship went down in the deep, accepting our defeat. No panic, no retreat. For the captain I was. Down with the ship I must. We lost our way in the great big tide. She swallowed us whole and kept our souls. We're spit back out, adrift at sea. It looked all the same to me.
So they survive it. Is it just the ship that was lost? Interesting.
It's all that I know. We sailed the 7 seas. Means everything to me.
So that was beached. That was beached. Now, I'm unsure of whether they're alive and they've gotten out of it and they're just kind of stuck on a... I'm assuming they're stuck on a beach. They managed to survive the Siren's call, but they lost their ship in the process, I think. It's a really interesting conclusion to this. It is a nicer one than I was expecting. You could have probably have ended on a Siren's call, but it kind of softens a little bit with beached. You know, it's an interesting turn lyrically to go from talking about how they had it and then how he has one. It kind of like lets you know that it's like he's processing that he had stuff and that he still does have things. And even though it's a sad ending, I suppose the crew sadly kind of like sing along to it in that midpoint kind of indicates that they don't know how to get out of this, but at least they have each other, I'm supposed. It's a bittersweet situation. He went down with the ship and he managed to get out of it. And you kind of get the feeling whether you don't know whether he's going to recover from it because it's all that he's known, you know. It's a solid conclusion to this album. I think that it was nice to have this one a little bit more sort of like less heavy than the previous. I think there was less of a reason for things to be too sort of like intense when it's sort of commiseratory. I think the use of the mandolin almost sounds like a person on their own on the beach, kind of like playing along to it. So I think that the more kind of low-key performance vocally matches that mandolin well. You've still got that bop-bop kind of polka feel, almost like it's representing when they were in the mess hall. To have the steel-stringed guitars to come in with a bit more kind of fullness in the mid, and then the lower range is kind of nice because it helps to kind of suggest there's more than meets the eye there. Great use of triads in that part there to not overcomplicate the arrangement. I think having the mandolin move to the right side and then having the strings or the fiddle move to the left to kind of explore the stereo field was a good idea. It just helps to kind of develop the composition further and keep things interesting throughout 3 minutes 33. And then to have like the crew kind of take over and at 2 minute 30 mount, just structurally to have more variety to the vocal performance was great. You know, that was well captured there. And it's a nice kind of loop instrumentally, that motif that kind of goes around until he realizes what he still has. And that's kind of, and I think the crew comes in before he acknowledges what he has, and that's his current situation now. And you can just kind of imagine the crew with him on a beach. They're fighting together like that. And then it just finishes with the captain and the mandolin at the end, acknowledging their position. And yeah, that's the end. So structurally sound, appropriate texturally, contextually. There's a nice bell curve with the overall intensity to this album in terms of the heaviness of the guitar and bass and drum parts, etc. You know, we've got a wide range of different riffs, which we'll talk about in the overall conclusion, but just a really satisfying ending in the way that I feel like I've actually heard a story. And you don't often get that with albums, unfortunately. Either they're variety boxes where you kind of have a lot of different stuff that's like, oh, okay, that's a simple concept on its own that we're exploring. I get that. It's great when they're kind of tied together in a bow for a wider kind of idea. But similar comment studio production-wise, it was just nice to be able to balance the more analog acoustic elements within this in a way that was nicely measured and effective and respectful of the feeling that we had there. It genuinely sounds like the captain is just so destroyed by this. There is an implicit kind of unhappiness illustrated by the crew as well, like they're mourning the loss of their ship and what they used to have. It's very affecting, and we're going to talk about this album more in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion, my review of this album from an act named The Muggles, titled Raided Arrgh. Now, this is a huge video. When I do like song analyses per track as opposed to the two things that I like about it, plus some constructive critique, they tend to get longer, so I first of all apologize if this has been quite a long watch, but I don't know how I could have done it in a way which would have been more efficient without missing things. I probably rambled at some points, but we'll get into the main crux of it. But I think first of all, what is this album about? It is about a pirate and their crew as they go on an epic adventure and they sail the seas, and they talk about the battles that they go through, how the captain came to be as a pirate, you know, all the monsters or risks or things they sing about as like maybe myths or legends until they actually come across the Siren later on. The unconditional sort of like the risk of death, getting drunk and having drinking games and then feeling very sick and unhappy afterwards, and then, you know, like the joy of when that wind finally comes and is able to get you to somewhere you want to be, the thrill of being able to take over a ship and firing your cannons and enjoying the spoils of that, whilst appreciating the fact that people have died. There is the stench of death in the air, and then the end being when the siren's call causes the ship to crash and you sort of like beach itself and against the rocks, and then you've got them beached on the beach, and you've got the captain initially sort of sounding like they had lost everything, but then as the crew comes in at the end, they realize they have each other. They just saw mourning the loss of their ship and their former life. And so it's an incredibly mature and articulate and creative idea that I haven't really heard before in my time doing reviews, and I think that there needs to be more music like this. I want to hear more stories that are contained like this and as much of a passion project as well as just competently performed, written, and produced as this. I'm not going to talk about per track stuff here. This is the overall analysis of this album, because I've already spoken about each track in depth in their own mini sort of sub-conclusions. But I think if I talk about the vocals in general, you just had a fantastic pirate captain who was charismatic, you know, like captivating, very easy to listen to. Stylistically, you can hear they're a pirate captain. They sound like it. The vocal fry they have is fantastic. They've got kind of this gritty voice there. They're capable of being a captain and shouting out commands as well as singing and doing sea shanties. And then they're also able to sort of show a bit of fear and sadness in songs like A Siren's Call and Beach. They're a human being, and they show vulnerability. They show a lot of different angles of themselves, and you do start to sort of like either root for the captain or at least understand them better. And that is not something you get with characters in albums or people even. Honestly, sometimes I find myself unable to sort of like relate to people, but this captain was really cool, and I felt genuinely sorry for him when they got beached on the rocks by the Siren. It was terrible. And I don't usually have that reaction when I hear albums or music like this. That's the beauty of an album, is that you can have that entire story in one sitting and be able to appreciate it like that. I don't think you can split this into several listening sections. You kind of have to hear it in one. And it won't take you 2 hours to do that on your own, so feel free to do so after this review. But great vocal technique, comfortable in the head and chest voice. The crew with their backing vocals, they were great. They're comfortable with their lines. There were no notes that were off, and if they were deliberate. And there was like chanting, and there was like spoken parts, and like Foley, and like people talking about like people going overboard, and it was just very organic, you know. It wasn't an over-polished, over-produced performance, you know. It was raw and believable, and you wanted to invest yourself in it, and there was a lot of range rhythmically and over the piece, and it was like spoken parts. It's just really cool. There's a lot of cool stuff. I appreciate the variety there we go. Structurally, these tracks were typically about 1 to 3 minutes long, and you know, they're bite-sized little bits of popcorn, but they typically had verses or choruses there, so they're easy to follow in that regard. Lots of different instrumental breaks. There are some solo sections. Even the shorter parts, like Double Rations, were like a really cool situation with like people in a room eating the food together. You could hear them conversations and stuff like that. Nelson's Folly, you know, talking about rum and getting drunk and everything like that, and a celebration of that. Sunt Dracones with the mandolin solo, and now discussing the different monsters on the sides of the stereo field. And it's just like they each had their own identity. Though I should note that for the most part, there was a general consistency with the performances of the guitar, bass, drums, the mandolins, and the hurdy-gurdies. They're the organs. They were easy to hear in the mix. They typically were very, very well played. If I go through a few of the individual parts and what they did, for the most part, the guitars were typically sort of chordal or harmonic. There were some tremolo pick parts, some interesting lower end riffs there, exploring majors, minors, Phrygians, and some other other scales there, but typically triad based. Weren't afraid of any diminished there. There were chromatic notes as well, including in parts where they were drunk, like with old stumbles there, illustrating a sense of, oh, we're kind of wobbly, you know, and the music kind of falls alongside that. There were some sub leads and a lot of sort of harmonized like dual guitar parts where it just had a kind of like a intimidating presence to it, or it did flat sevenths or something like that. It was a bit more sort of nuanced. And there was some like very subtle lead guitar bits, I think, in Phrygian Frigate there near the end, which was a nice voicing of that. The bass guitar was very sort of like loyal to the root notes within it. Occasionally we had a bit of movement there and we kind of bopped around, but it was a foundational device there. And the drums did that as well, but the drums also had a lot of varieties of different grooves there. Sometimes we were comfortable with kicks and sort of snare roll components there. Other times we messed around with sort of like some galloping. Like there were some parts where we were incredibly quick on the kit, and our use of 8/4 seconds, 16ths and 30 was fantastic there. We were never out of time. We were incredibly tight with our percussive performance there. We had some interesting sort of offbeat and syncopated elements there, even some polymeter or polyrhythmic stuff going on certain tracks there. Unusual time signatures as well, which were not kind of predictable there. We would have like bars which kind of cut a bit early, and you kind of taken aside by that, and just before you got too weirded out by it, it would make sense. I'd go back to like a traditional 4/4 or something, and it would be like, oh, that was just the journey we went on. Those are usually in tracks where there was a bit more chaos anyway, so it made a lot of sense, you know. But like we had like some really cool sort of slick fills as well there, and just generally the drum knew absolutely what they were doing and very comfortable, like almost leading the band in components. The hurdy-gurdy was another fantastic lead element there, typically rolling alongside the lead guitar elements there, providing main motifs. I think it was a fantastic sort of supportive lead or an alt lead there, and we were left in a position where it just simply was a pleasure to hear it. Occasionally with some sort of like polka elements there, where it kind of boom ba ba boom ba, and it kind of added an interesting offbeat accent, which kind of had a bit of a kind of a jiggish kind of tune to it. And again, like just like with the drums, there was fantastic movement between the swing out triplets and then the main sort of 4/4 parts, and within tracks themselves we went between those to illustrate a sense of speed or pace or something like that. Comfortable with going half time, normal time, or double time in certain components there. And ultimately, while the hurdy-gurdy or the organs were typically more supportive of lead guitars and established stuff within similar triads, there were moments where they were in chromatic as well and explored. I think the mandolin solo in Sunt Dracones was fantastic, but it was also cool to have it be an occasional thing. I think on account of there was a song we'd have like the mandolin just in a little gap before the chorus, and that was really neat. So it's like, oh, it's just kind of like picking in that space, and it's just it's just nice to allow there to be pauses and gaps there. And I think there was one song, I think it was Old Stumbles, if I'm not mistaken, or Greco's Blunderbuss there, where we were really sort of in like instruments would stop, start, or things would be kind of like a bit unpredictable and unusual, but it would suit the mood of it and what we were discussing. And there were other elements like strings and certain points later on and keys, and then they were represented by the main instruments and reiterated and rearticulated. But ultimately, the instrumental performances across the board were fantastic. We had a wide variety of melodies, harmonies, and rhythms incorporated, and structurally, no track was too similar. They were distinct, but tonally and texturally, they matched each other really well. And even with Beached at the end, which was more sort of acoustic oriented, it didn't need that heaviness in there for it to matter. It was just great. And there were nice sort of like trade-offs or transfers between tracks, you know, like rum, and then boom. And then, you know, double rations for the captain going together, and then they kind of like hum together, and then suddenly the sirens comes. You got the siren as well with their sort of voice in that track as well, an alternate like lead there. It was just great to have that in the background for a bit of spookiness. They communicated mood so well. And so I think each theme made sense with the song it was and matched, and I had no issues there. It's just the studio production is the final thing I want to sort of discuss, and I think it was incredible. I'm so stoked with the way that the vocals were handled across the board. The mains, the sides, the spoken parts, the Follies, even the parts in Double Rations where they were simply talking. It just sounded like a mess hall, like they were having food together, and it was just great. It was very believable. Things were leveled nicely within the frequency spectrum in the stereo field, as well as like vocals on the sides in certain parts there. The guitars, bass, hurdy-gurdies, you know, all those instruments as well were easy to hear in the frequency spectrum stereo field. They're leveled neatly. Nothing really where anything argued, aside from one part where I mentioned one of the lower vocal harmonies sounded a bit too close to other elements simply because there was a lot going down there, but it's fine. There was dynamic range to it, nice and loud without pumping, so the bus compression limiting was handled, and the vocals were not overproduced. They sounded like they could have been from a film soundtrack. It's genuinely one of my favorite albums of this year. I'm glad that I had the opportunity to listen through it. And yeah, thank you for watching my review of this album from an act named The Muggles, titled Raided Arrgh, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show them some love via their various social medias and their Spotify page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever with crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.